So good evening, everyone. My name is Ruth Yeiser, and I help coordinate the adult education programming at Congregation B'nai Jacob in Phoenixville, and we are delighted to have all of you join us this evening. So back in the fall, when I first requested a speaker from the league, I thought we'd be talking about an important subject tonight, but I don't think I was completely aware that Pennsylvania was going to become the center of a storm. For one, I really thought that the redistricting process was going to be in the rearview mirror by now. And I figured that I would be voting by mail and happily avoiding running the gauntlet at my local poll. It never occurred to me that the PA Supreme Court would be announcing a congressional map today, or that a lawsuit would have been filed to stop that process in favor of 17 at-large congressional seats. And in the meantime, the House Majority Leader has filed suit to keep our current state legislative maps in place for the 2022 election. And a plethora of state constitutional amendments are being pushed forward that either mess with constitutional checks and balances or skirt those checks and balances altogether. Our democracy is at stake. Tonight we are fortunate to have Susan Gobreski with us. Susan is a 25+ year career advocate focused on campaign strategies and program development for improving public policy around equity, economic opportunity, democracy, and education. She serves as a senior advisor to the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center for Democracy Work and as a volunteer member of the Board of Directors of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania as the Director Chair of Government Policy for the board. And this evening, she will be talking about election and voting policy in Pennsylvania, our democracy at stake. Susan, we're all yours.
Hi, everyone. I see a stream in the chat of people and where you're from, but if I have not met you before, I'm just taking a quick look. If you haven't, please feel free to add who you are again in the chat. So where you're from. My name is Susan Gobreski. I live in Philadelphia. I grew up in Chester County from 3rd grade on. I'm originally from outside of Chicago. I have been doing public policy advocacy work for 30 years at this point. And I live in Mount Airy in Philadelphia with my husband. One of my 3 children, the other 2 are cast out, graduated and working and going to college and things like that. I started on the League of Women Voters board last June. I have done a lot of public policy work. Some of you may have encountered me. I started a state group called Education Voters of Pennsylvania, which actually is a leading group in the state now, is doing a lot of work to mobilize people around the school funding lawsuit. I actually got my start working on environmental issues for clean water. I may have knocked on somebody's door 35 years ago. So my field has always been in issue organizations that are closely involved both in passing policy, also the understanding that elections matter. And through my career, one of the things that's happened is that one of the things we've evolved to or devolved to is that democracy itself is at stake. We've gone from having debates about the scientific levels of arsenic in drinking water to whether or not we should be funding schools to now who gets to vote, how easy or hard it is, who gets to participate in democracy. And without participation, you really can't have representation. I am also a known fast talker. So I definitely talk too fast. So I will ask my fellow moderators to help flag it for me. And I'll just keep an eye on the chat. If somebody says slow down, I'll try. I'll take a breath. So here's my plan. And I have a lot to say, but I think it's really boring to listen to someone talk for a long time. So I'm going to tell you the topics that I'm going to cover, and then we'll do a little chat section after each one to do Q&A instead of holding all questions to the end. But that means that everyone has to work together to make sure that we leave time for all the topics. Does that make sense? Thumbs up, verbal waves, nods, feedback. That'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so my plan is to talk about maps because we do have an update on those. I am planning to talk about the current trend around constitutional amendments. I'm planning to talk about litigation. I'm planning to talk about state policy and legislation. I have another one. I want to talk a little bit about good policy and some of the things that the league is focused on, and including poll workers and our voter services work as a general hat tip. And I'm happy to talk about policy. I do know some things, but I don't know everything. So I don't mind being corrected unless you're like my kid and I'm trying to explain something. So then it gets on my nerves. But so 17-year-olds are rough. They are rough. So that's my plan. If there's other things that we want to talk about, I will do my best to either cover it or agree to follow up about it. Thumbs up? Okay, great. All right, so maps. Okay, here's the deal. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania today announced a map. And what they had done, just for those of you who followed the legislature and the governor, congressional maps are passed by legislation. And what that means is that the governor and the legislature have to agree to something to enact it. It was done quickly in 2011 because there was a lot of agreement. The Republicans controlled both the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. So boom, 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 they did it. Not too much process, boo. And then they passed it. So a lot of people are actually not aware that this is legislation. So they couldn't agree, so it went to court. And the Supreme Court, basically you had to file a complaint, and the Supreme Court said, or the Commonwealth, they said they would enter, Commonwealth Court said they would entertain maps from people who had petitioned and appealed the process and said that the Supreme Court was going to have to intervene. I was actually one of the individual interveners. We did not get approved, but we were able to file an amici, so we were able to contribute a map. And the court basically said it would choose from the maps that had been submitted. They could have also done anything they wanted, basically. So a number of maps were submitted, and they ended up choosing what's called the Carter map. And I'm going to do my best to show it to you right now and send you information. And if anyone makes fun of how many tabs I have, then I don't know what I'll do. I'll just look angry. But give me 1 second to figure out where my tab is here. Here it is. And this actually, I'm not sure why it opened up to this partisan issue. I'm just going to show the district colors. Hold on. This is the map. Can you see it? Yes, someone nodded. Okay. So this is the map. This is actually the partisan lean on the map. And a couple of things that happened. They did actually do some splitting, but they did some arranging over in Western Pennsylvania here. This 15th district, 2 legislators were combined into this district, although there have been some announcements. This is these 2 districts here. This 7 is Susan Wild, this is Connor Lamb, and the 1st congressional district is Brian Fitzpatrick. So this is the map that they chose. It was actually a little bit unexpected. A lot of folks did not expect this map to be chosen, but it was chosen in part because it was called the least change map. For those of you who follow these issues, there's a whole set of values, including some that are required by law, like compactness and equal proportion, and then some that are just sort of general guidance. And so least change, in my opinion, is actually not a good value to bring to a map making process. It's a good consideration for things like tiebreakers, recognizing that there is some, that we all develop sort of expectations around how we're represented and what community we're a part of when maps are done, but that the point is equal representation. One of the things I want to say in all of this about both congressional and state maps is that the most important thing is that we have new maps. This map is still going to be, there's still going to be some process, federal lawsuits filed against this map. Some people are making an argument that we should have, going back to an archaic 100, I think it's like 100 or 90-year-old provision, saying that if all else fails, what we should have is 17 at-large congressional seats, which is ridiculous, and trying to stop this map from happening because one of the parties is concerned that it disadvantages them, and they have said it's because they have a natural political advantage, which is garbage. Garbage being the nicest word I can think of. Natural political advantage. Their argument is that somehow people of color and Democrats choose to live together in concentrated areas, and so the Republicans should have a natural political advantage. And I'm actually not being partisan. I have plenty to say about partisanship, and I'm happy to talk about that issue in a second. I'm actually just trying to report what the various entities are saying themselves. I think this issue of natural partisan advantage actually smells really bad to me. It feels like code for racism, and doesn't recognize that any quote natural political advantage comes from things like redlining and policies that have kept people from moving and being able to, get jobs and access growing communities with new infrastructure, et cetera. So this is our congressional map. I will put the link in the chat if you want to go look at it and play with it yourself, unless somebody's already done that, which is probably true, but I'm going to just do it anyway. That's the map. You can look at the districts. You can look at the overcurrent. There's demographics. So there's all kinds of fun things you can do with these maps. But this is the one, you can look at these, each district and see how it breaks down and how the communities within it. So that's the congressional maps. I'll do a quick update on state maps, and then we'll do questions about either. How about that? Is that okay? Thumbs up? All right. So I'm going to take this down and so that I can just see you all, because, that's funner. State maps also being litigated. The Legislative Reapportionment Commission approved final maps by a 4-to-1 vote. Was it like February 4th, a couple weeks ago? I think we're about halfway through the 30-day period. It's all starting to be like day. So that there's a 30-day period to give people a time to file litigation and make a complaint that the maps are not good for some reason. I'm going to prognosticate here and say that I think that it is probably the case that these maps will be upheld for a variety of reasons, the most important of which is that they are more fair. They are significantly and substantially more fair. Again, an effort is being made to try and stop those maps from taking effect, making the argument that we should run on the old maps, which would be grossly not representative, gerrymandered plus population shifts, plus many changes that the census and new redistricting are supposed to accommodate for, until there can be a time where a map can be agreed to. So that is so once that 30-day period is up, the court, I think that LRC comes back together, finalizes, and then if an appeal is taken up, and if anyone has a corrected version of what I'm saying here, please feel free. It's not impossible that I'm jumbling something. Then those maps will be effective. Because the Supreme Court today also issued a timeline for petitions for elected representatives, that also forces the hand of the state maps as well. People need to know their districts, and the petitions start in just 5 days, right? The 28th, I believe, Monday. So that's my update, and you can actually go to the LRC's website and take a look at their new maps and figure out where you're likely to be. Now you are likely to be able to know what your districting will be. So now we're going to take questions. What I'm going to ask you to do is either physically put your hand in the air or raise your hand by going to the little reactions down at the bottom and come off mute. That's also another way that I'll see that you're interested, or put your question in the chat and we'll read it for you. Alan, I've been on the phone with Alan before, so I know him, so I'll go. Alan, go ahead.
Currently we have 9 Dems and 9 Republicans. According to 538 in the newspaper today, the new map leans toward 9 Republicans, 6 Democrats, and 3 are kind of even. So is this map a step backwards?
Well, I think that there's a difference between a map and the opportunity it creates, and then sort of political trends and changes. I don't know about it. I mean, certainly it depends on who you are, if it's whether, and from a nonpartisan point of view, this would be something that most observers would consider a fair map. So in that sense, it's not a step backwards at all. So if you're a Democrat and it feels a little bit less favorable to you, then it might be a step backwards. If you're a Republican, it feels like there's more opportunity. But what I would say is that this is a fair map, and that's what's most important. And so there's that. Yes, like what I heard someone say is like Susan Wild's district got a little tougher. Brian Fitzpatrick's district got a little easier for him, but or it got a little harder, but he's likely to win. So because of his incumbency and because he's known in the district. So I think there are those things. Other questions or comments? Okay. All right, Andrew.
Unmuting, okay. So there was a question before today, whether the new map would be ready in time for the primaries. How much time did you need for that to be so that the primary can occur in, I guess, May when it's supposed to? Can I assume now that because this map came out today, that the prior timelines are all going to be met and primary will go as is, the proper time and all that?
Yes. So a couple of things. Supreme Court issued a calendar for the primary, for the petition period, and for the nominating and all of those things, in order to keep the primary on track. Lots of people wanted to keep the primary on track because of expectations, also because the Department of State and counties have planned for it. There would be expense and lots of management and issues. What I would say, though, is that the most important thing was that we had new maps, even if we had to push the primary back, but that is now a moot point. The primary will run in May as scheduled.
Thank you.
All right. So do you want me to do like legislative policy next or constitutional amendments?
There's one more question in the chat. Do we know how independents are reflected in this new map, in the congressional map?
You can look up the data in terms of independents. I mean, independents, so Pennsylvania, I think, has 46% registered Republican or registered Democrats, 38%, I think, registered Republicans, and then independents tend to be about, actually, you know, funny enough, reflect about those partisan breakdowns as well in terms of voting, which is all to say that Democrats do about 52%, 51% of the vote. Republicans do about 48 overall, but that's, you know, that also depends on the year and the level of the ticket. We, you know, for example, in 2020, there was both Republicans and Democrats won at the top of the ticket, or the highest races, so the presidential, congressional, and some of the statewide races, and lots of incumbents. The partisan breakdown of the House and Senate didn't change much at all. So it's hard to figure those things out in terms of an exact match. The court actually said that they don't look at voter registration, which actually struck me as a little odd. They try to look at what's called performance, which is how people actually vote, regardless of how they're registered. But performance is a lot more variable than registration. So independents are going to be most heavily reflected in the places that they are the most swingy, but there are plenty of independents in both deep red and deep blue areas, as we say. All right, Ruth, your call. Do I do legislation and policy next, or do I do constitutional amendments?
Let's go for constitutional amendments.
Okay, which actually they're really married together.
Yeah.
So in Pennsylvania, a couple of things to note. One, we do not have a ballot initiative, so when something goes to but voters do actually get to vote on constitutional amendments, and we call that a ballot measure. So because we have a legislature and a governor who can't agree, and that is normally considered part of the system of checks and balances, our legislature has figured out the following, that proposals for constitutional amendments do not need to be signed by the governor. So they do, as a matter of process. It goes like this. You have to pass the exact same language in the House and the Senate, 2 separate sessions, and sessions are 2-year sessions here. So 21-22 is one session, 23-24 is another session. And so the exact same language has to pass the House and the Senate in 2 consecutive legislative sessions of the General Assembly. And if that happens, it goes to the voters on a ballot measure is what that's called. And if the voters say yes, and so far in Pennsylvania, the voters always say yes, then our Constitution is amended. Now, the legislature has figured out that if they do this, the governor doesn't get a chance to veto anything. So if the governor can't veto it, they just get to pass things. So they have taken it upon themselves to pass. There are currently 75 proposed constitutional amendments, only a couple of which are actually poised to go to the voters. They actually have to get passed one more time. Now, just so you don't freak out, they're not going to all end up on the ballot. 75 of them have been passed in either the House or the Senate, or both just once. So we're not quite at complete and utter chaos. And by the way, I'm going to try really hard not to curse, but I occasionally do. So, anyway, so here's what's going on. So these constitutional amendments, there's several issues going on with them. Some of them are okay. Some of them are bad news. They want to impose greater restrictions and more requirements on voter ID, for example, which the League of Women Voters litigated a decade ago. Some of them, there's one dealing with abortion. There's actually an excellent, let me find it and I will post it. There's a Spotlight PA did an article with a ballot initiative or a ballot measure tracker in there, a constitutional amendment tracker. There's several that deal with a couple of things: taking more powers away from the governor, trying to take powers away from the courts, creating these congressional or these judicial districts. You guys have heard judicial gerrymandering, and that's an effort to try and create districts that are take away the power from the voters and try and rebalance it in favor of the people that the current General Assembly favors. That's the one that's in the greatest danger of passing, and we continue to keep an eye on. So all these constitutional amendments, there are a few things that are going on. One, there's been really a terrible process when it comes to sort of good government and things like transparency of process, like public notice, opportunities for people to testify, enough time for people to comment, or both parties getting to participate in a process to try and figure out what's happening. So there's a bad process, lots and lots of bad proposals, lots of poor motivation and context, certainly something that will create voter chaos and overwhelm voters. And so there's a few different efforts underway. One of the things that we're all going to have to do together is work together to make sure that as things develop, we work to try and stop some of these bad proposals from getting on the ballot at all. Second, that we work together to try and make sure that as we move forward, people understand that we're going to have to become more discerning consumers. We can't go into the ballot and be like, if it made it onto the ballot, it's probably a good idea. Sure, that sounds like a nicely worded thing. I'll vote for that. I am a really educated voter, and I myself have done that. So if I know that if I'm willing to do that, other people will, and the evidence shows that, because people in Pennsylvania vote yes. So we're going to have to start talking about the need for people to say yes, no, no, yes, hopefully not 75 times. And then we're also going to have to push really hard on this sort of the underlying theme here is efforts to change the way who has power in our government, and to strip away the power of the governor, which does act as a check against sort of the populist legislature. So that's what's going on with constitutional amendments. Again, I will, when I take a breath here, post a link for folks to read the article and to look at some of the constitutional amendments. This is an area where you should start getting educated when you have an opportunity, a little light reading. And then there'll be work to do as we move forward in terms of spreading the word about how to respond, and making sure we educate our neighbors, book groups, social clubs, et cetera, about these issues. But that is one of the trends we're seeing in Pennsylvania, like multiple prong strategies to try and attack government and change government to try and stack the deck. I'm going to have to let my dog out in a second, but you start thinking about your questions, putting your hands up. I'm just like, she just needs to go out of the room here. So I'm still listening now. So that's what we'll be doing, is fighting on constitutional amendments, both the merits of them and the process that's happening right now. On the other hand, we don't want to say that voters shouldn't decide things. We want to be able to say that, what needs to happen is we need to have a good process. And then really importantly, the Constitution is supposed to be for protecting rights, not imposing things like administrative requirements, like what kind of ID is good. You're really like the other issue here is what is the Constitution for? And the Constitution is supposed to be a foundational document that is not quite as subject to the winds of time. Voter ID is a great example. If you want to start passing a constitutional amendment that specifies what kinds of ID are allowed, that means that you have to pass a constitutional amendment to change what kinds of ID are allowed. That is a measure for administrative or legislation. So questions and comments, and I'd love any comments. I'd love someone else to talk for a minute about constitutional amendments or questions. Ruth.
I guess my thing with the constitutional amendments has really been that if a bill can be passed legislatively with a governor's signature, like that's the way it should happen. If they can't get the governor's signature, who was elected by popular vote, then it is not something that should go to the ballot box. Because the governor is like the check on a legislature that is needs, they need
Absolutely.
to check. And, and one example is, I mean, a lot of people really want the liquor, the liquor to be sold wherever, right? And, that's one of the constitutional amendments. And yeah, that sounds really good, maybe to some of us, that you can sell liquor anywhere, but if it was so great, then it should be able to get through the legislative process and it should be signed into law by the governor. It's not something that should have to go to the public at the ballot box without hearings and without expert testimony and, with just, 10 minutes of debate if we're lucky. I see Alan's hand is up.
Yes, I know some of the constitutional amendments have voter suppression measures in them, like you mentioned, voter ID. Do any of them have taking powers away from election officials? Are they trying to any of those amendments trying to manipulate the election machinery the way those laws were passed in Georgia?
Yes. There's several proposals, a couple of things. One, there's one that is in the works that would actually propose to, it says it would create an independent commission to draw maps, except it's actually a legislatively appointed commission. And if they couldn't agree, the power would actually revert to just a few legislators. There's a voter ID. I'm just taking a quick look at some of the others. There's one that actually goes after RGGI, which is the Regulatory Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And so there's nothing so far, I think, that would take away. So the elected officials in Pennsylvania, there are county commissions and they oversee elections. And then they hire, they're staff level election directors. So those are not elected, they're appointed. And then the elected officials for elections are judges of elections, and I will talk about poll workers in a few minutes. So far, there's nothing about that. I don't think that there's a constitutional amendment at this time, although there is something in policy. One of the proposals that they want to do by legislation is try and get poll watchers, who are not the poll workers, to be allowed from anywhere in state, which is a bad idea. Poll watchers have to be from the county. Otherwise, it's people from central Pennsylvania coming to cities, with open carry permits to try and intimidate voters. So we've got issues there. It should really be limited.
Just a question. Was the rule always that amendments didn't have to be signed by the governor, or is that something
Yes.
that? So this is the same rule it's always been.
Yeah, they just
They
picked
just
up that ball
decided to
and ran
abuse,
with
they
it.
just decided to abuse it.
So I'm going to go Lee and then Eric.
Okay, thanks. So which, if any, constitutional amendments have passed 2 sessions and are going to be on the ballot? And if and in addition to that, which ones are most likely for that to happen with the next legislative session?
So I'm trying to look at, hold on, I can take a quick look. There is something coming up for the primary this year, so I'll pull that up. The one that we're watching the most closely, is the one about judicial gerrymandering. This is the proposal that would create judicial districts for the Supreme Court. But as a lot of people have said, there is not a Sullivan County way of looking at the law and then a Philadelphia way of looking at the law. They are deciding statewide policy issues. Everyone has an opportunity to run from any part of the state. It would actually limit some people's ability to run. In areas where there are more people, that's where there are more lawyers and law practices and courts that are busier, where people are getting more experience. So there are a lot of good arguments for why we should have lots of questions about the whole issue of judicial selection, which I'm not going to get into at this point, unless we end up with a lot of time and a lot of questions. But right now we elect judges. And so that's the argument for keeping it. I will pull up a link to answer your question about what's on the what's coming up on the ballot, but the controversial one that is the most imminent threat is the judicial gerrymandering, and the soonest that could get on the ballot would be next May. It can go, this session of the legislature goes till November 30th. We just passed the timeline by which it could have made it onto the May ballot. The legislature keeps putting it on the schedule. Actually, this is something you're going to keep seeing action alerts about this. So if you are on lists from the League, from fair districts, from other groups, Pennsylvania for Modern Courts, Common Cause, you're going to keep seeing alerts, and you're going to be like, oh, it's going to feel like the Chicken Little thing, like the sky is falling again. Yeah, I get it, the constitutional amendment. But the issue is that they are going to keep putting it on the schedule. They are using it as scheduling it as a tactic, essentially, to keep people in a flurry about it. And they've been using it as sort of a negotiating point as we start getting into Harrisburg budget season, which, if you want another really fun presentation, I can go back and do one on that sometime. But budget season in Harrisburg, everything goes into one big pot and gets negotiated. And so they'll be leverage. They'll use it as leverage. Like, if we do this, we won't pass this. If we do that, we will pass that. So we're going to keep seeing it, but keep responding to those action alerts as you see them. While Eric's asking his question, I'll pull up the link on what the current ballot questions are, but I am listening, Eric.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about mail-in voting. I don't know if this is a legislative issue, but yes, is that a yes or a no?
Go for it. Just keep talking.
Okay. I thought I saw that they said mail-in voting is no longer acceptable, but we got our notices for asking us if we want to do mail-in voting again. And it says, do you want to? Or you want to vote by mail? You want to vote in person? And mail-in voting for any reason is a good thing if you do not want to stand in line and you're willing to go to the county drop box and put your thing in, or the local library, wherever it is.
Yes. So yes. So, okay, this is one of my favorite topics. So Act 77 in 2019 created mail ballot voting. So in Pennsylvania, the Constitution provides for absentee ballot voting. The fundamental argument around the court decision, which are the question here is, there's a couple, but the basic question is the constitutional requirement for absentee ballot a floor or a ceiling? I.e., does the Constitution says this group of people must be offered constitutional ballots. So does that mean those are mail ballots, the opportunity to vote by not voting in person? So the question is, does that mean that those are the only people who can do that? Or does that mean at least those people have to be able to do that, right? So Act 77 was passed in an overwhelming bipartisan majority and enacted mail ballot voting. There was a deal made where the Republicans actually wanted mail ballot voting, and they wanted to get rid of straight ticket voting so that people couldn't vote for the one pull, one lever, with the belief that they would win more elections. A number of states actually use mail ballot voting. either in combination with polling places or completely. Some states rely on mail ballot voting altogether. So the court ruled, this has been litigated, there have been rulings that it's been legal. There was recently a ruling by a Commonwealth court that Act 77 was not constitutional. They actually said, we're not saying it shouldn't be there, we're just saying the Constitution doesn't allow for it. So if the people want it, you have to pass a constitutional amendment about it. And then that's going to the Supreme Court. So that ruling has been stayed while the Pennsylvania Supreme Court takes it up. So the Pennsylvania court is going to take that up issue, and while that's happening, mail ballot voting proceeds. So as of now, and I would venture to guess, and I, by the way, am not a lawyer. I did watch a lot of Law and Order, but I'm not an actual lawyer. Mail ballot voting is likely to at least be in place through the primary, depending on how the Supreme Court rules. I'm actually also, again, you can write it down and you can message me if I'm right or wrong later if you track it. It was passed, there was actually a provision when the legislation passed that said there was a certain amount of time to challenge it. Now, you don't want to hang your hat on that too much, because if there's a bad law, you want to be able to challenge it regardless of how much it's passed, how long it's been. And several of the legislators who voted for it are actually part of the lawsuit against it now. So one, if you want to vote by mail right now, go ahead. That's what the state mailed the applications. Now couple of things to remember. One, it actually says permanent mail ballot list, but it's actually annual. So that's one of the things they need to change. Each year you have to apply to vote by mail for that year. You can also change your mind. So you could apply to vote by mail for the primary and then decide to vote in person for the fall, although you will be assumed to get a mail ballot and you'll have to actually take that ballot with you and spoil it at the polling place, but you're allowed to do that. You're allowed, if you decide you want to go vote in person, you're allowed to do that. So anyway, the other thing I'll say to you is that if you think mail ballot voting is a good idea, right now, the more people who do it, one of the problems with this litigation has been that voter confusion is one of the things that keeps people from really participating. But one of the ways to essentially show a vote of confidence in it is to apply for your mail ballot now. And so that we get the numbers up to show that there's a broad support, because that's the other thing that happens is courts also will look and consider how many people are going to be disenfranchised or alienated. One of the things I happen to know is that 200,000 people who were registered to vote in 2016, but did not vote, voted by mail in 2020. So I'm going to say this another way. In 2020, 200,000 people who had been eligible to vote over the past 4 years, i.e. they were not new voters, actually voted in 2020 by mail ballot. So they'd been eligible, but they hadn't voted. So mail ballot voting brought them into the process. And that is one of the other things I'll say, which is in general, the test of good policy should be, does it increase the likelihood that eligible voters are voting? That is good policy. And so anything that makes it harder or creates more barriers, that's bad policy. How am I doing on time? Questions? I know I'm talking so much.
I have friends in Oregon and friends in Nevada who have early voting, mail voting, early voting, anything they can do to make voting easier, which we don't seem to have. Any chance that's going to happen here?
So yeah, that's actually so I have a little list of like, one of my main talking points on my little document here is that every policy should make it more convenient for eligible voters to cast their ballot. So that's things like drop boxes, satellite election offices, actual early voting, mail ballots, right? I had to testify in front of the Senate. I was in Oregon visiting my aunt, and she's 90 years old, and she had a ballot show up in a little voter's guide, and everyone in Oregon votes by mail. And even my cousins who have different political views than I do were sitting there being like, but why wouldn't you vote by mail? Like, it's so like, that's a good thing for everyone. So yes. So some of the message training say, when we talk about making it easier, that triggers sometimes people feeling like it's easier to cheat. There's, as I'm sure all of you have heard, there's a stunning lack of cheating when it comes to voting. So it's, our bigger problem is getting people to vote, not getting people to vote once, not people who vote twice. But, so there's that. So yeah, vote by mail, same day voter registration, also something other states have. That's another good policy. All right, I'm going to go into a quick, so that's constitutional amendments. I'm going to do a quick legislative update, and it will relate to the constitutional amendment issues, but I'll still cover some legislation. So here's something to remember in Pennsylvania right now, and this will make a lot more sense because we just talked about the constitutional amendment. But in Pennsylvania, for the next 8 months, nothing good is going to pass and nothing bad is going to get signed. So the nothing good will come out of the legislature when it comes to voting. There are several voting packages, most of which are in total not good, but they are good provisions within them. So there are good things there, but they are packaged with things that are bad. So a lot of groups will be spending time and energy opposing those things, but the governor will not sign them. So again, nothing good is going to get passed, nothing bad is going to get signed, but we are still putting time and energy into opposing bad policy because they help set the stage. They help create benchmarks and sort of starting points for discussion and legislation. We need to be really clear about what good policies are, and we need to be clear, especially with some legislators. There are still at least some legislators who are willing to listen. So we need to make sure we're taking the time to educate them about the difference between good and bad policy. The big bill that we have referred to, House Bill 1300, passed in June. The governor vetoed it. It came back again in September as House Bill 1800 with largely the same set of provisions that included things like voter ID, restrictions and changes to voting opportunities, like rolling back voter provisions around ballot boxes, around drop boxes and satellite election offices. Couple of the themes that have come up are these power grabs and giving more power to the legislature, making it harder to vote, gerrymandering, putting more power, again, even things to draw maps back into the hands of the legislature. So the thing I have left to talk about is the audit, but I want to stop here for any questions about policy. And there's a host of policies that are proposed, and most of them, as I said, are not good, but that's a policy update, which feels like I'm giving it short shrift. But we are also allocating time and energy in these issues as well, watching the things that are actual threats, and working to try and drive narrative into the right direction. Questions or comments about policy? Alan? No? Okay. I'm sorry to be so talky. All right, the other thing I'm going to just cover is the audit, which is our so-called audit or scam audit or sham audit. As you probably heard, and this goes to litigation, the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee, which, by the way, is not the committee that oversees elections. That's the state government committee. Doug Mastriano, who's now running for governor and was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, photos of him at the Capitol. He was the chair of the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee. They decided to subpoena the voter file, and not just the voter file. There's plenty of information that's public on the voter file, but they subpoenaed additional information, including private voter information that is usually not released, like your driver's license number and the last 4 digits of your social security number, saying they needed it to investigate the elections and to do an audit. We actually already do something. 66 out of 67 counties participated in a risk limiting audit, which is a statistical verification of election results. If any of you do elections, you'll know that poll workers actually have to provide a count and make sure that the number of votes on the machines match the number of voters, certify the results in the polling place. They get sent to the counties. Counties have to verify them. They get sent to the state. The state has to certify them. It's actually a much more rigorous process, I think, than a lot of people are aware. But they said they needed the information. It was not clear to anyone about why, but they subpoenaed it. And state committees do have subpoena powers. This has also been litigated. The League of Women Voters is a party to this litigation, opposing the release and sharing of this private information. One of the questions being, why do you need it? And that in general, the argument around these types of issues is that voters have the right to vote and they have the right to privacy, and arguably not the right not to be investigated by the very people we elect. And that it would also be a great risk to individuals for things like financial risk. So that is there's still not a court decision on that. However, there are a couple of updates. One of which is that the Senate actually hired a vendor called Envoy Sage to assess the voter file. Again, it has not been yet turned over to them, but that contract was paid by the Senate GOP caucus, which is not, it's taxpayer funded dollars, but it is not the actual committee. It was the GOP caucus is the holder of the contract. So that means that the GOP caucus would be the contracting for this analysis done by this vendor who has a very little track record and questionable. It's like a guy in Iowa. And so that information would get released. And there's all kinds of issues with we don't know what security measures they would take. We don't know what the procurement process was. We don't even know if the results would actually get released to all of the members of the committee. So a lot of us have a lot of concerns about that. And in addition to the risk risk to individual voters of having their private information released. And a reporter from Bucks County named Chris Ullery actually heard the court argument and said, so what would you find if you just looked at what information is publicly available? And he actually went and did a really wonderful analysis of the voter file and looked at this. And I will post this article. We actually had him on a session that we did, a webinar like this one. And he updated us on his methodology and what he found. And I will put that link in the chat as well. And it was amazing. I mean, he really looked at like, what are the issues that arose? And, how about duplicate names? And what about issues around voters moving? And so what are those issues? So you can actually get quite a lot of information. So now it's an even bigger question about what they would actually really be looking for in terms of getting this private voter information. So that is where the so-called sham investigation of the Senate is, and we still don't have a court ruling on that. Questions and comments about that? Okay, I have my wine ready it's my water, my wine. So how am I doing? Is this okay? I'm talking so much. I'm so sorry. Okay, Lee. Off mute, please.
I have a question about voter ID, and I just want to make sure you got through the audit part before we circle back to that. But it sounds innocuous. It sounds voter ID. Why wouldn't you want to have your voters identified? So can you get a little bit more specific about voter ID and why certain proposed legislation might be detrimental?
Yes. So there are a few things, and I think that, I think that's right. And actually there's a lot of popular support for voter ID. I will actually also send this article, and I said I would send something else. So if folks can remember what I said I would send, put it in the chat for me, please, or get notes. But so this Muhlenberg was around looking at our electoral process. So there is a lot of public support for voter ID because it does sound so reasonable. I think there are a few different issues that are going on. One, for starters, in the last 20 years in particular, voter ID has historically been something that was used to keep people who had less money, and that can also read people of color because of the way our country has worked, from voting. Because if you don't have, so for a long time, you actually really did not need ID. So lots of people didn't have it. People didn't have a certified birth certificate, didn't drive if you lived in the city, things like that. So voter ID was actually used as a way to make something reasonable actually have an effect that would affect communities as a large thing. So that's one issue. And even though that is less true now, it is still true. Lots of people my daughter didn't get a driver's license until she was 21. You know, I mean, so like there are things that around, and people, if they move, things like that, are less likely to have easy access to documents. So that is one of the things that has historically been used to keep people who are poor from voting. And older people, I was just talking to someone recently, their mother-in-law driver's license expired and they just had no reason to get it for her, so it kept her from voting. And so those types of things can happen. So they're trying to pass legislation. The other issue is, of course, how restrictive it is and what kinds of ID. So there are things like in one proposal, there was like fishing and gun licenses were okay, but student IDs were not. So it's sort of the devil in the details is really the main issue here. And I also think passing it as a constitutional amendment means we're creating a structural barrier that is really hard to change. You know, when you pass something by legislation or by administration and rulemaking, you can change it in ways that keep up with technology changes. You know, there are other issues that people have to often pay a cost to get many of the forms of ID. So there's another that becomes a poll tax really of sorts. It becomes a way of keeping people out. So, and again, you know, we have voter ID already. Actually, in Pennsylvania, you have to have a voter ID to register to vote, and you have to show ID the first time you vote at a polling location or when you mail in your ballot. So it's just a question of how restrictive it is and how many barriers that creates for people. And one of the things I'll say, and I don't know if I'm supposed to, you know, sometimes this is about math. Every policy that you pass will bring people in and maybe bring some people in and exclude people. So sometimes this is about looking at policy and figuring out, does this help more eligible voters vote? Does it increase the likelihood that more eligible voters are going to vote or not? You know, if there are restrictions that you're putting in place, but that'll help other people vote, sometimes you have to look at that and say, like, you know, that we are a big enough society where that works. Voter roll purges are another issue. So there are policies that sound very reasonable, like we should purge the voter rolls every day before the election to make sure that dead people can't vote. I had someone in 2020 call me. I was doing poll worker work, and I do want to do one plug for that. So everyone has to save 1 minute for that. And this guy called me and he was clearly suspicious. He was like, my father-in-law is dead and he was on the voter rolls when I went to the polling place. Like, explain that. And I was like, first of all, I had really owed this guy nothing, but like I was tired of what I was doing at the moment. So I decided to talk to him. And I was like, well, did he tell the county that he was going to die? And I was nicer than that. I wasn't quite snarky, but I was thinking it. You know, he was like, no. And I was like, well, did you notify the county that he died? And he was like, no. And he was like, but he's dead. Like, so why didn't they take him off? And I said, well, you know, people sometimes only vote every 4 years. And so even though he's been passed away for 18 months, like, you want to preserve the opportunity that somebody might, you know, not have shown up. And the other thing that happens, and this happens to several thousand people, I think was the last count I heard, is that people will get removed, like John Smith Sr. passes away and John Smith Jr. Gets taken off. And then you've created a barrier for John Smith Jr. He has to go chase around, cast a provisional ballot, try to prove he's not dead. You know, so you can pass policies that say things like, well, you have to notify someone. Like, we think you're dead, Susan. Are you dead? If you're not dead, tell us so that you can stay on the voter rolls. And then if nobody answers this, or if we get a return, like, then you get taken off. So there are policies that you can take to mitigate these types of impacts. But a lot of these things have an impact that will actually keep people from voting, and that's bad. So, you know, if you want to keep, if we don't have dead people voting, so it doesn't hurt to say, listen, we're not going to take people off the rolls for 30 days beforehand. And we are going to notify people that we've received some sort of notice. Like, there are policies like you should match people on 4 different things in order to remove them instead of 3. And that makes sometimes a difference of a couple thousand people a year.
Thanks.
Susan, did I answer your question, Lee?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay. There's more on that. There's all kinds of like legal reasons and things like that. But lawyers do a better job at that stuff, but they don't necessarily talk for less time. Other questions or comments?
There was a question in the chat asking if the Attorney General can intervene with the audit.
They did.
That was taking it to court and saying
Yeah.
you can't have their social security numbers.
Yes, they are in there. There's a court, you can actually look the subpoena of voter information. If you Google that, you will, in Pennsylvania, you can actually see all the arguments. And actually, I will tell you that if you are either really dorky or really bored or really worried, the Attorney General's brief on that is actually like some of the lightest legal reading. Like I actually really enjoyed reading it. And I'll see if I can pull it up or get it to Ruth to send out as well, but you can also look for it. It was actually really like, it really tells the story of some of the context and the facts that are at issue. It's really, really, really beautifully written. Like whoever did it for them should be really commended because it's really helpful in terms of understanding it. In fact, I should have it up on my go-to links thing. So, all right, yes, thank you. I'm whoever reminded me, Ellie, about I will send the Chris Ellery article around because it's an amazing piece. All right, I'm gonna indulge myself and talk about poll workers for a minute, and then we'll do any other questions, and then I'll shut up. So, one of the things I did is part of my consulting and democracy work was I worked with the Voter Project Empower the Polls, and I was responsible for recruiting poll workers for all of Pennsylvania in 2020 at a time when we were facing a crisis. We always have a poll worker crisis actually, but then on top of all of that, we had COVID, and there was a big fear that if we didn't have enough poll workers, people would be in long lines and therefore wouldn't vote, or polling places would be closed, et cetera. So this issue became very near and dear to my heart. I continue this work and actually I'm very happy that the League of Women Voters is actually stepping into this, has done some work on this as well. But one of the things we're going to be doing is recruiting poll workers for a couple of reasons. You may have heard that one of the things that the election conspiracy theory people are doing is trying to take over elections and election judges in certain places. That's where they get elected. They're also trying to become poll workers. They also, if you recall, there was video of people trying to storm a vote counting center in Philadelphia. So we actually, those of us who care about democracy and care about the process, to the degree possible, have to step in and make sure that our election operations are protected and as sacrosanct. And so judges of elections and then majority and minority inspectors are elected every 4 years. That election just happened, but counties always have vacancies. And if you're from the county, you can actually be placed into some of those positions. And the more good people that we have who care about democracy and care about protecting people's rights in polling places, the more we're going to have people keeping an eye on any election deniers, even if they were, because some of them have been like legitimately elected by their neighbors to be these places. So we're actually doing some work to look into what polling places have people where people are at risk of being harassed or intimidated, or potentially more barriers are erected. Like judges actually don't have the right to change the law, but sometimes they're like, I'm the judge, what I say goes. And I say that ID that you showed me isn't good enough. So, because currently we do have some ID requirements. So it might be good enough for some places, but not for me. I've actually seen that happen. So we want to make sure that we have lots of people paying attention and recruiting poll workers, being poll workers yourselves, recruiting poll workers, signing up for election protection activities. So we are going to be rolling out more communication to help spread the word about the need for people to volunteer, to get trained. Parties, actually every party and every candidate has the right to have someone in the polling place. In general, there's only a few people who are allowed in the polling place. Not even like the Common Cause or the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights can have people in polling places, but parties and candidates have the right to have somebody in there. So if you're interested in doing that, you should sign up with a party or candidate, but we can have poll workers who are in there. So you'll be hearing more from the League about this and some other sources. So I would like to encourage you, if possible, to sign up or to help spread the word, if it's for some reason not something you can do, about the need for people to become temporary or backup poll workers to help fill vacancies as your counties experience them. Did I do it? Did I cover everything? What did I miss?
You covered a
Okay.
lot. There, are there any other questions before then we wrap up? What I will do, Susan. Oh, Art, go ahead.
Oh, Art has a question.
Unmute.
Yep, I did. It's not a question, it's a thank you. It's increasingly difficult in the position of the LWV to appear objective because things have become so polarized. So I know that the statements that you're making are, at least as I hear them, fair and equitable. So first is a thank you for continuing to do this work, which is becoming more and more challenging on a day-by-day basis. And secondly, have there been any attacks, threats, comments that really impact the way the League of Women Voters continues to do the good work that they do?
Let's see. We have not received any like little envelopes with powder in them or bomb threats, for starters. Like, so there's that. We have gotten organizationally, I am aware of no direct threats in that way. So there's that. We have been increasingly called partisan. I actually got a really unpleasant email from a legislator, and boy, I decided to take the up high road, and I sent him a really like, oh, I'm so sorry, I have concerns. If you want to sit down and meet, blah, blah, blah. He didn't answer, but I'm just waiting for the right moment to roll that one out. It was quite nasty. But anyway, so there's that. I mean, the threat is actually, just mobilized people. People are ready to engage and ready to, move. So, I think that is one of the things that I always find heartening, which is that, I grew up in Chester County at a time when it was still really farm country. And so although I've never been a farmer myself, but, some of the metaphors of life there really work for me. And one of the things I think about is, we are all working the land, right? And sometimes they're thinking about the river, right? Sometimes we're sandbagging to keep the river from flooding. Other times we are bailing and trying to dig out things from the mud. And other times we are planting seeds and reaping crops. I don't know if that all works, but there is always work to do. And so I'm really always happy to be with smart people who care about something more than themselves and are willing to mobilize and spend energy. Some of you have heard me speak before. One of the things I will say here is that we do not get tired. We are not the people who get tired. This stuff is certainly frustrating and demoralizing and discouraging, but we are the people who cheerfully send out the action alert for the 5th time. We are the people who take the call, ask our neighbors, bring it up again at book club, talk to our PTAs, whatever. We have to keep the conversation alive, and we have to also talk about what we stand for, not just about what we're angry about, but the vision that we have, right? What is the vision here? The vision here is that, somebody coaches soccer and somebody else's pizza shop succeeds, and that we are all able to read our books and write our symphonies, and that our communities thrive and that our children grow. So we have to share the vision that we have, and that democracy is part of that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I will just say that I continue to be invigorated by the opportunity to stand for what we believe in and work together. That speaks to something larger than ourselves, and it gives us an opportunity to share our vision, and that is how we're going to win over the people in the middle. There are some people who are with us and some people who are against us, and there's everyone else. And so we got to make sure that we keep talking to them and that we keep fighting for them, and fighting for a world in which we can all walk down the street safely, and go home and, play with our plants or read a good book or whatever. I went over. I'm so sorry, Ruth. Thank you though for having me.
Susan, thank you so much for being here, and thank you everybody for being part of this. What we will do within the next couple of days is we will send an email out to everybody who signed up to be part of this with the various links that were posted so that you'll have a collection of reading material to do over the next, I don't know, week, month, 6 months, whatever it is. So thank you again, everybody, for being part of this.
But don't just read, act.
Right, citizenship is a contact sport.
That's right.
Thank you.
You guys are lovely and gracious, and I hope that for those of you who enjoy wine, I invite you to go ahead. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.